So as you know, we're here to talk about the lack of African American and Latino founders and investors in the venture world. We feel, we at the Reitler firm and Reitler Advisory feel it's a really pressing and timely topic. I think there have been great strides made, and we still have a lot to do in other areas such as women in venture and all minorities, but in particular there seems to be hurdles holding back the African American and Latino community. I think a lot's been said about what those hurdles are. We're going to go through them quickly in the beginning of this talk, but I think we'd really like to get into solutions and action points that we can take away from this, and I really want to hear from our panel on what they think would work, what I'll throw out some things that maybe they don't work, but I really want to get to the experts and not stop hearing myself talk. So let's start with Alan. You know, a decade ago at MIT, when you're getting your degree, your master's degree, you published a thesis, The Online Obstacle, a study of African American enterprise on the internet. You recently published an article revisiting those topics 10 years after the fact. Can you speak a little bit about the original study, what's changed and not changed since then?
Well, thank you for having me for this, and thank you all for attending with us. So, to describe the online obstacle, which was my thesis that I wrote about a decade ago when I was a business school student, a few things helped to bring about the study. And again, it was focused on the lack of African American representation amongst our companies within a certain category of companies. And those were companies that I call blockbuster. They've since called unicorns and other terminologies. But think about it as companies that create intergenerational wealth. So billions of dollars of value, and thus create a number of different power elements inside of that. But an article at the time, this was 2010, was written and then followed up in mass media about the press. Thereafter noting that the digital divide, we were all of the digital divide. Right? If that had closed, it was done. And the story was, because every African American home had a computer in it, and mobile was taking off, and African Americans were indexing on mobile, that's no longer an issue, nothing to see here, let's move on. So that struck me when I read that, because it wasn't my experience that everything in itself. Secondly, looking at companies that were iconic, and we can all think of companies like that, that sprung out of that era, sort of the mid-90s into the 2000s, and even into the 25th decade, Twitters of the world, Googles of Facebook. These were companies that were these iconic blockbuster companies, but not one of them, there are many of these companies, those were not the only ones, had a founder amongst them that was African American, nor was there a company conceptualized by an African American that had become blockbuster. So these were conversations that I had with my wife at home, with other students around me, and I decided to use and dedicate some of my time, also business school students, writing thesis about it to bring attention and to start a conversation. So quickly, just to take you through what that looked like at the time, and what the thesis entailed. I was looking for entrepreneurs who were Black, who had indeed founded some sort of consumer-facing company, and made an attempt at least at reaching the status. But why consumer-facing? Why not every single company? Well, we could look at every single company, but these are companies where you, me, and everyone else in the world are downloading, so there are lots of us. So that's an easy way to get to some sort of blockbuster status. So I used that, and I used my network to find some entrepreneurs. Well, I found 16 who made an attempt. And I began to ask them questions through survey and interviews. Why is it that you aren't on the founding team of Google or Facebook or what have you? And there were some common threads that came out, which I'm about to share with you. But I do want to note before I mention that. The thesis, and it still counts today, is not to say that there aren't successful companies that founded by African Americans. There are. It's not to say that there aren't African Americans founding companies. Some are sitting up here, I'm sure there's some in the audience. Is to say this intergenerational wealth and blockbuster status is not achieved. So, what were the three things that came out of the study? Well, two of them I'll mention up front and sort of group them together because they're in a category of being able to do something about it as an individual. And I'll move on to the third. So the first was Silicon Valley. It's very special. It's a great ecosystem. Well, so whatever reason, African Americans just don't live there. You have to be in an ecosystem in order to enjoy the benefits of the ecosystem. And there were article after article written about what that looks like and what it means to be able to move from a coffee shop table and have some blog writer and VC at another table and having an entrepreneurial community. Well, if we look at data, and all of this is data backed, at the time, I think it was 1% of the population within San Francisco, so the area that happened to be African American. As you dig deeper, just to note, some of those were sort of domestic workers and others. So we weren't sitting inside environments such as tech companies, economy, schools moving slowly now. So that was one. But we can choose en masse to do that and move there if we so chose. So that's number one. Two, numbers of graduate students or of graduates of engineering programs and computer science programs who happen to be Black. Well, I call this the pipeline issue. We constantly hear pipeline, can't find the entrepreneurs, and hence there aren't enough graduates who are choosing that. Well, that we can define someone as well or solve because other ways to manage new students who are really with graduate degrees in engineering and computer science. That's the only way to start with these companies, but it's a typical way. And there are initiatives, whether it be capital from Philanthropist and other ways to increase that, which is happening today. So wonderful. So now on to the last, and it happens to be one of the topics tonight, and that is access to capital. Every single person interviewed mentioned there's a lack of access to capital. Not only did they mention there's a lack of access to capital, they called it uneven playing field. And when I asked them, what would it take to solve this? Well, there are a number of solutions they came up with, but of note was that the time frame that they thought it would take to solve this was the next generation of entrepreneurs, maybe. Let's call that 20 years, okay? So 20 years, so we're halfway through that process, they thought it would take to really get to one of these launch companies. Well, as Ed mentioned, I authored an article that revisited Fast Company in December that revisited my thesis to explore what's changed. Let's take a look at this. And some things have changed. A couple of things are, I looked into new information and data. There are Black VCs, not to, there are. So you can count that as a way for entrepreneurs to see who to call, potentially, not that you need money, if you do that. But at least you have a phone line to pick up to perhaps feel comfortable making a call. So there are, and you can go on and note, I noted in the article that there were several names on the list of some index that I looked at. What's interesting about that, however, is none of the funds, with all due respect to those people who use this panel, were sitting in places like Sequoia, or the mega funds today that are funding in the billions of dollars companies that are known to us as Blockbuster. And there's just one other note there. I found it took $500,000, that was a magic number, to be able to reach that status. Not to say that was an absolute necessity, but every single company's Blockbuster happens to have had that within some angel seed round. So you combine that with where we are today, and sure, there are more entrepreneurs out who look like me. There are VCs who look like me, but last comment on this entire thing together. The state of it is this. Yes, there have been improvements, but I always look at it as two lines. I'm going to put this down because it's important. If you see an increase, we do it this way, so it's the right. So if you see an increase, that's wonderful. You can get some benefit out of that with VCs. But if there's another line moving that is faster than another line, guess what? They never meet. They will continue to diverge. So I'd like to bring that up as we enter into this conversation because yes, there are improvements, but I'd like to bring to light they are not drastic enough or creating enough shock and awe or disruption to make the change that we would all hope to see. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Let's talk a little bit about that shock. I mean, I was shocked. I kept asking Joyce, the brainchild of this event, if these numbers she was giving me were correct. I was shocked. Over the last 20 years, Joyce, how many, I meant to give this number from you, how many of these how many VC investments total over the last 20 years? Tens of thousands, it's gotta be, maybe.
Yeah, no, I mean like a lot, but the number that you're looking for in terms of the study, right, is in the last 20 years, out of the thousands of companies that were VC funded, you know, there's only 105 that were founded by African Americans that raised $1 million or more.
105 that raised $1 million
Tens of thousands.
out of tens of thousands of companies that have raised in the last 20 years. How does that happen? How can that be? I mean, and fortuitously, we represent, I don't know if you remember Hopstop, founded by Shinadu. It sold to Apple maybe 10 years ago, 12 years ago, somewhere around there. That was one, we represented Hopstop. We were fortunate to know Chin because of, visionary, brilliant founder, technologist. We also were lucky enough at ARC to invest in a couple of prominent companies such as MoviePass with Stacy, and we Park Pick, which actually sold to Amazon. It was started by an African-American woman. It was featured at the White House by President Obama. But 105, Stacy, you're worth 2 of them. Like, that's amazing. So, Stacy, can you speak a little bit? Are you surprised by those numbers? Can you speak about your experience about fundraising?
Yeah, I gotta tell you, the funny thing, when Joyce reached out and we started talking, we were catching up on other things. You know you have to deal with it, but it's such a heartbreaking issue. And I was coming off of, now, show of hands, is there anybody in the room who's not heard of MoviePass? Just want to make sure. So a little bit of background on the story. So 2 Black founders. I was the original founder, then my partner came on who was at a VC firm, right? So, and then we raised a little bit of money. We kept going. And then we got an acquisition bid, and that's when the company really became public, and not public as a public traded, but publicly known. And the valuation of the buying company and the value of the company shot up to almost $500 million. And it kind of got handed over, and some of you remember seeing the complexion of the gentleman who started to run the operations. And within 9 months, after going through a lot of money, it was gone. And I know that if I went through that amount of money in 9 months, I would have been taken off to jail. And I can tell you the full raise to that point was $10 million that we had raised, and we created a company that was valued at almost $500 million. And here's the heartbreaking thing that I thought about on this coming for this panel. If there's 2 Black founders, we had access to capital, we would not have lost that company. And that's what makes that harder. It was, and Ed and Joyce, they helped us, and they were in our first round, they were in our seed, they were in our Series A, and we summited Everest, right? We made it. We were 2 Black founders. We had done an in-run around the movie industry, and it built not only a finance technology, but something no one had ever seen. Consumers loved it, runaway hit, and yet it reminded me of the early days of the Black artists in the music industry. When they could have a hit record or a hit album and they would lose, Red Fox and Sammy Davis Jr., they'd wake up and they had no royalties, it wasn't until Barry Gordy was able to make a seismic shift that started to happen. He was able to sell Motown, but maintain all the publishing rights, right? But he had built the juggernaut. So 105 after whatever, thousands, it's painfully disheartening. And, but I still believe that those of us sitting up on the stage, you're witnessing the first Black players in baseball, the first Black players in basketball, the first Black players in football, right? That's what you're looking at, okay? That's what you're standing in.
Will the real 1%?
Yeah. Will it change? Yes. Is it gonna take another 20 years? I hope not, but probably, because that wealth that's getting established so fast right now is gonna, unless it's legislated that a certain amount of that wealth has to transfer over, which isn't gonna happen, it trickles down through very small communities of who you know, so.
So let me just cover another shocking statistic. This is, as I was doing this choice of the research, I wish I could say I did it, but she gave it to me and I'm reading it. I kept thinking, why don't you go back and look and check again, because I'm not sure this is right. Do you know that the last 11 years, 10 years, 0.0006% of all tech companies funded have had an African-American female founder. 0.0006% of all tech companies funded in the last 11 years, I should say, have had an African-American founder. I know it's all women are underfunded, that's for sure. It's one reason Joyce and I wanted to help Anu launch our first fund, the Female Founders Fund. We're fortunate to have Jay as an investor in that fund. But there have been strides made for female investing. We really haven't made any progress in investing in women-led businesses among African-American entrepreneurs. So I wanted to ask Angela, what has your experience been as a female entrepreneur, navigating the venture world and fundraising?
It's been an interesting journey, and to be transparent, it's been a struggle, but I persist. Just want to say that. But outside that, I think the main things that I experienced in the New York market was cronyism for the first time. I'm from Massachusetts, and I have a deep belief in Massachusetts just from I went from banking to beauty by accident. But on that journey, I've always been hired at some of the best places. And in Massachusetts, I noticed we hire people who are highly skilled and we look for the best players. Unfortunately, in New York, even the way the employment laws are set up here, it's set up so that you can literally fire your friend fire someone in New York to hire your friend, and it's not illegal. And we can't do that in Massachusetts. So I've experienced DC cronyism in New York when it comes to the tech space, the startup space. And so when you look at even some of these new funds that are focused on minority founders and women, that ends up getting carried over into those spaces. So we talk about access to networks and stuff, and so that's been my experience. You get this new fund, everyone's so excited, they're focusing on women, they're focusing on entrepreneurs of color, and people still just put their friends in the fund instead of focusing on, hey, I want to find the best entrepreneur who can reach that $1 billion status. And then the other thing I've noticed is that I'm used to being in spaces that I'm not supposed to be in, right? I spoke at the Ernst & Young World Entrepreneur of the Year Awards, CEO of MasterCard sitting in the audience, founder of Giovanni, Martha Stewart, having breakfast with these people, having conversations. This is before I even touched the startup space. I was a makeup artist and I was transitioning out of Reiki at that time. So I wasn't supposed to be there, but I held my own, made connections with these people. They absolutely loved me and they helped to open up their network so that I can get a little bit further. But there seems to be this real intrigue with this struggle and success story, and everyone loves founders of colors and their expertise, but then there's always that, well, I want to put my friend on board instead of you because, well, they went to Harvard, they went to Yale, and that's just the way things work. And I don't accept that narrative anymore, so I challenge it.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about networks and how we can expand networks to because you can get a lot of, I think I've heard it, I maybe even said it, we just don't see candidates in the pipeline, and there are ways of seeing those candidates, and it means getting out of your comfort zone and getting into other networks that you wouldn't otherwise be part of. Well, you guys are the expert on that. We'll talk about it in a little bit. I want to cover the VC side of this now, which is the lack or the relative lack of African-American venture investors. They only represent, according to our research, 2% of all general partners of investment. Venture funds identify themselves as Black. So, Lenard, as a GP at Edison, you're one of the prominent funds in the country. Could you describe the hurdles facing African Americans who seek to join venture funds as professionals? I think it's hard for anyone to join a venture fund, first off, but particularly for African Americans.
Well, I think it mimics what you've heard in the other aspects of business, being an entrepreneur, getting those connections. It's all about connectivity, and because the existing population is largely non-African American, the linkages just simply aren't as tight, aren't as close, and so you're viewed as more distant. I'll never forget, as a senior in undergrad, and Stanford has a great program where all the athletes, you have your network, you have an athlete network. They create this, the Red Stanford Cardinal book, as they call it. And a guy who played baseball had a cup of coffee with the White Sox, just said, you know, business is self-selection. And that's exactly what it is. People like people who talk their language that they grew up with and who look just like them. And so that's it. That's everybody says. It agrees. And so it's not unlike any other aspect of this. There are fewer African American and Latino partners, and so it's harder.
What are your thoughts, Courtney?
I would agree, Ed. I think I come from an interesting background because I've been in a lot of those big meetings, and when I was at Rice University, I was on the investment committee, and I'm also kind of a new entrepreneur when we started our venture capital fund. So I know the excuses, and I know a lot of them don't hold me. And one of the thing that I've struggled with being we started our fund, it's $1 million fund, it's tiny, but trying to find mentorship. And it's not just mentorship among other African Americans, but it's mentorship in the broader sense. Like, I'm a new fund manager, I'm smart. I was an entrepreneur. I started a new company. I would just like some mentorship, and then on top of the mentorship, like a little capital, because we would like to invest. I'll tell you one interesting story. So we had our first fund was we're still in our first fund. We're at the end of it, investing. Started in 2011. Since that time, we've had 3 exits out of our first fund. And Lenard and I are partners in investing in a company called NSA, which you guys may not know, but we were a seed investor 2 years ago at 3.25 million valuation. September, they don't call me anymore, so I'm going to ask Lenard what they are now, but in September they were valued at
I appreciate your efforts.
in September, 2 years, they were valued at 400 million. Not bad, right? Yeah, thank you. Not bad. Still paper, things can still happen. But 6 months ago, I'm sitting in a meeting with another BCP who, they have a large fund, and I'm pitching him on a business that I'm backing personally, not in our fund. And the first question he asks, he says, so Courtney, like, how long have you been in this space? Like, what kind of companies you invested in? And I said, I wonder how many other VCs he's asked that of. Like, he's trying to school me. And so I immediately went into my NSA pitch, and that was kind of the end of that discussion. But I think it's a lot of times it's that perception. Like, I walk into the room, and so I'm not going to give you capital, or I'm not going to listen to your company's pitch for whatever reasons. I brought Angela here, and so I met Angela at an NFTE panel, and she pitched me on her idea. And I was like, interesting, like I'd never heard, I don't know anything about the beauty space. I know Tristan Walker had his company, and she pitched me on something. I said, you know what, that's interesting. It's not investable, which a lot of companies we look at, like it's not investable at that moment, but I said, I see something there. I'd like to help you along. And Angela could tell you, but I don't know that she's had that discussion with people like, I'm gonna help you refine this, and I'm gonna make introductions, and that probably happens much more, going back to Alan's point, in the Stanford community, where people are sitting around desks and like, oh, have you tried this? Try this. Or if they fail, they're on to the next company. Like, there's no loop and a failure loop, and then, okay, get back on your feet. In our community, if you fail, you're out of a job, and that's kind of it. That's, and especially for our venture fund, That was one of our things. I'm African American, my other two partners are Asian American, and we were very mindful, we have to make winners on all of our investments. We can't afford to go for a home run and strike out. Because if we strike out, we're down, or at least I'm down. And so I think that, you know I mentioned a few things here, but I think all those kind of, on our side, they kind of work into limiting our access to capital and getting to capital. Because again, we're just like entrepreneurs. We got to raise money as well. If we have a bad portfolio, it's going to be a little difficult for us, unless we go start a new fund somewhere else.
Well, I'll say this, everything that Courtney just said is certainly accurate, and on the fundraising, I assume Ed probably has some questions teed up for that. It makes it a little more difficult, and you just, I was always told growing up, you have to be better, period, and it's just right. I remember my father, and it's great that you used the baseball analogy. If you go back in the late 60s, my father was a huge baseball fan. I went to Stanford football scholarship, disappointed because I was a better baseball player, but run football. He said, here's 1968. He goes, every team, their best players is their black player, period. I remember Frank Robinson talking about when he came to the Orioles, becoming the Orioles, said, well, let's see if he can make it. He'd already won the Triple Crown in Cincinnati, right? Led the team out. Clement, those were the best players. So that's what it has to be.
Well, I just have to say, kind of, one of your comments, bring Stacy's comments about how much differently you view if you lost all that money. So that is an unfair, that African Americans are held to an unfair standard. There's another component that I think is unfair, could be considered unfair. When you give another shocking stat, and I kept asking Joyce, are you sure this is wrong because these are so vague? The median white family in the US has 41 times the amount of wealth that the median black family has, and 22 times the amount of Latin families. And so the question I really wanted to open up to the entire panel is, how does this affect pure startup founders of color who are trying to raise their friends and family around? That first round, prior to institutional capital, prior to professional angels, many people go out to their network, their own network. How does this wealth disparity impact the creation of companies that are led by African Americans and Latinos?
You have no network. You have the numbers. The numbers online. I'm trying to help two young gentlemen out of DC do the same now. I mean, we have to go into the extended family, which is tough because you just don't have wealth. Wealth is generational. You've had only 50 years. My father went to school in a segregated school. In Maryland, you were given $2,000. You went out of state if you're African American. When I applied to Stanford, I wrote that, and my father always kept a copy of it. So that was in my paycheck. So wealth is generational. We have a much shorter history of generational wealth. So we have fewer wealth. So you have to pass the hand around for a much longer period of time.
And I'll also add to that, one of the first things you say as a VC is like, well, how much money do you put in? And then go raise, okay, why don't you go raise some friends and family money to get this off the ground? Because that's not our job. Yeah, that's not our job. And then African American founders are like, well, where am I going to get that money from? And again, from my side, I can't give it to you because, the only thing I can do is to do with Angela is I can talk to you and I can maybe hopefully make introductions to those same people who question my investing ability, who may or may not invest in you. And again, I love Angela. I'm so glad she's here because it's a great idea and just needs some people to help work it through, but I can't give you the money.
So as a direct lender to entrepreneurs, I've seen the good, the bad, the ugly, the worse. With regard to that capital that you need to get started, what we did at the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone for diverse real estate developers is we created what we call the Real Estate Fast Track Fund. So we had an amount of capital that we would lend out to startup or emerging real estate developers. And so I had just started in the role about 9 months ago, kind of looked at the numbers, how much are we lending out to them. I came from an environment where, we were allocating, $100 million to private equity firms, and, we were sifting through VC firms. So it's, we'll lend them like $500,000. And I was just like, $500,000? What the heck are they gonna do with $500,000? And so, but the ecosystem of diverse owned real estate development, people are like, we need it. We need any and all capital that we can get hold of. We're happy with every rate we want to charge us that, because it is so difficult for us to get that initial capital to get off the ground so that we can even be competitive with our mainstream counterparts. Our mainstream counterparts, they're not worrying about where to find the money for architecture blueprints or to hire additional hands, or the licensing fees, or the gauntlet of rules and regulations that you have to hurdle in order to develop a real estate project in New York City or New York State. Their counterparts operate in a world of unconscious confidence that the capital disclose. They know somebody in the family, hey, Goldman Sachs said they're going to give us $1 million to get this thing started, and if they lose it, they're not going to miss it. How many of you ever read a book that came out, I think about 10 years ago, called The Alpha Masters? Okay, so The Alpha Masters is a book about some of the best and brightest in the alternative investment space, and just a mindset that they had around raising capital. And none of these folks are African American. You read the book, a guy goes out, goes to his friends, goes to his family, raises like $10 million, goes out, sets up a business, goes and buys a house, goes to leasing a Porsche, so he can look like he really knows what he's doing, goes out, raises some more capital, loses it all. Loses it all, takes the Porsche back to the dealership, unloads the house in the Hamptons, and starts from scratch, like it didn't happen. Like, what? Yeah, okay, so maybe a couple mistakes, but they're back in Greenwich. They're at they're at all the Greenwich family office events and fundraising events, like it never happened. I'm still me. I'm still a smart guy. I still went to Harvard or not. Maybe I went to Hofstra, but I still know what I'm doing. I was able to do it before, and I can do it again. I can tell you that 99% of African Americans in this space, if you lost that kind of money, you might think about getting a job as a barista at Starbucks, or sticking your head in the sand for the next 5 or 7 years, and hopefully people will forget about you. Mindset is a huge component of helping us to incrementally get up that ladder. We have to, as African Americans, adjust our mindset, and it's difficult. Our backgrounds are diverse, and come from places. I lost any of you my dance money. God rest his soul, he's not with us. I might be able to come home for Thanksgiving. If my mother asked nicely, but we have to adjust our thinking around believing in ourselves and what we bring to the table. We come from a group of folks who are a little smarter, better educated, better trained. Most of us have been through some sort of training program. We are just as capable as our counterparts. We can't think that we're on like a different tier or a different platform. We have to aim for the same precipice that our counterparts do.
So, while we're on to Blair, Blair is sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, what I'd like to add to that is, it's also, when you think about it, a lot of guys in this position, it's their first time seeing that kind of money. So I'm in a position, I have a group of friends who, they just stumbled upon some money, they did some business deals, they're doing pretty good for themselves, Black and Hispanic, and I go to them and I say, listen, I got this phenomenal business opportunity, it's a $100 million deal, and I can show them all the facts, and I can show them my deck, and everything look phenomenal. But that fear that they put in their last, is a big difference than when I go sit down with Goldman Sachs. And they don't have that same fear that I'm telling my friends, listen, you guys right here should invest in me, right? Because I'm gonna keep this money right back into the same community. I'm from the South Bronx. We're gonna make this business right in the South Bronx. We're gonna keep these dollars rotating 5, 6 times in the South Bronx, right? But they are scared because this is their first time seeing that kind of money. They got the weight of their family's legacy on their back. And they say, boy, we love you. This is my nieces, my granddaughters, their whole life, their whole change, their whole family dynamics changed by one deal that they just made. And as much as they love me, they're too scared to invest in me, even though they believe in me, right? They'll vouch for me, but they won't lend me that money out of fear. So I think that's another part of the mindset that we need to think about is letting go of that fear, trusting one another, figuring out how to keep those dollars circulating within that very same community.
So I'll tell you an interesting story. For me to get money from my father is in tech. For me to get money from him, I met the co-founder of Grubhub on the panel with Courtney, and he stayed in contact with me as well. He said, I want you to try this approach. You can use my name and tell people that I'm going to invest in you, and then, see if they'll also invest. And then if everyone is on the same page, then we'll all go in. So I had to do that in order to get my father to give me $5,000. The only reason he listened to me was because the co-founder of Grubhub. Okay, he did it to me. He said, look, Grubhub, I have a stock, I think this is interesting, so tell me more. And I had to pitch to him, just like I was on, in a competition. I'm really serious. But it's because my father grew up, he's from Honduras. He came to the States, made a way for himself by going to college and going into engineering, and so he's very tight with his money. He's like $5,000 is, well, like, let's talk about this is absurd. But that's what happens is that founders of color, we rarely ever even get a seat at the table to begin conversations, even with accelerator programs or seed stage funds, because we don't have access to that friends and family funding.
Obviously, I come from a slightly different position here, and I listened to all of your stories, and I'm trying to figure out what am I doing here. My background was very different, but I do want to touch the issue of risk and how families look at it. I have maybe 35 companies in the friends and family around active right now. I can watch different people and how they go raise money, and it's amazing how people who are newly generating wealth are so more afraid of the risk profile of losing it all. So I did my first company in 1970. I was talking about it before. It was a great idea. We were making money for about 6 months, and then all of a sudden, circumstances happened, and the company was bankrupt within 2 more months. I went to my father, I said, I blew this money, I owe $22,000, and he looked at me and yelled at me and said, how dare you, how awful, how dare you, et cetera, et cetera. And then he wrote me a $22,000 check. Because his father did the same for him. Actually, my mother did it for him when he first started. 3 generations as poor as you can be. My mother did the same and gave him a second opportunity. So I listen to all of you and I say to myself, how do you change the fear of risk in your friends and family communities? Because those are the ones that are going to have to bet on you. Yes. And no matter how you do it, which firms, it's rare that Goldman Sachs gives you $1 million. It's much more likely you're going to raise $50,000, $75,000 from 200 friends. So I wonder, how do you teach people about risk, and how do you make them unafraid?
And can I just say one thing? True story, this is so poignant, I wasn't gonna say this, but here goes. So, MoviePass completely implodes, I get forced out of my company, I lose everything, I lose it all. And there was this moment where I'm sitting with my wife and our young daughter, and I'm trying to decide, am I going to get a job? Now, I've been self-employed for 20 years. And I'm sitting there thinking, I just decimated everything. It's all gone. And there's this moment where, do I call it quits or do I try again? And one of the investors that didn't get in the seed in the angel round calls me up. He had read about it in the paper and he said, hey, I'm in town. Do you want to go to lunch? And he's listened to me and he says, so what do you want to do now? And I tell him this idea that I'm working on, which is the company that we have now. And he's African American and he was an executive at Verizon. And he said, it is so important that we give someone like you another chance. How much do you need? And I said, well, for us to get to the patent phase, it'll be about $250. And he said, you'll have a check next week. And he's black. And he said, we have to get you back into the ring. We can't let someone like you sit on the sidelines. And I'm telling you seriously, I don't know that I was ready for the fight again. And exactly what everybody's sitting up here talking about, my family wasn't able to cut me a check. I was seriously thinking about, do I move back to Texas, right? And I've been here for 25 years, and I thought. And that made all the difference that I'm even back in the fight, because I don't know if he wouldn't have done that, what would have happened. So I think it's very important what you're all saying about that home base giving us that fight. And I don't know what a big pinch that was, but that was a big check for any individual. So, and he was a Verizon executive. It wasn't like, you know, he's, whatever.
I think it's more likely something like that happens, getting additional dollars from someone in the community or someone knows of you, as opposed to changing the risk profile of people who have first generation of not even wealth, but let's call it a solid financial foundation. I mean, it's hard to tell someone else that they should change their risk profile.
I will say there are people outside the community that also want to help too. And Jay, you were asking why you're on the panel. Jay, you've been doing investing in emerging manager teams for years. Can you tell us why you started doing that and how, what's important to you about that?
As a bit of the elder statesman at this panel, I did my first venture investing 30 years ago. And when we did venture investing then, we started investing, there was never a conversation about diversity, about women involvement, minorities. There were none. It just wasn't even a topic. And it was exactly an old boys club. You would go to 20 of your friends, they would come to you, you went to Harvard, you went to the Harvard group, you went to Yale, you went to the Yale group. But what intrigued me was trying to find things that can make a difference. My first business failed, but then I'd say half of them have failed since. But I think that it was 2006 when I made an investment in the first venture fund that had a woman partner on it. And it was, that venture fund ended up being the top 10% of its cohort that year. And so we started to see that people were making, specifically then more women than diversity in other ways, but that they were investing in areas that they understood and knew, and they knew them better than their male counterparts. So I think that when you do this kind of investing, we started to see that diversity made a difference. And it made a difference beyond investing in baby clothes, fashion, and cosmetics. No offense to the cosmetics people here, with the fashion, but even in other areas. And then once that happened, I guess in 2006, I know that Ed brought me a fund completely dedicated to women entrepreneurs, a female founders fund. And what I learned about it is their attitude and understanding of businesses came from a different direction, and that direction brought superior returns. And in the long run, no matter what one does in this, we look for the superior returns. I mean, I think it's interesting, there was a Morgan Stanley article that came out, they did a survey, and to this day, since 1990, there's a full near 20% of venture capitalists who believe that diversity investing is not consistent with superior returns. And this goes for 30 years. So I guess my story is that we make a big effort when we do direct investing to have some sort of diversity component. We want to look for people because I think they bring different ideas. And I sit on the board of 2 companies where I happen to be the only male board member, which and so for me, I think that as we move forward, we have got to find ways to get people to appreciate that diversity brings superior returns.
Blair, when you were the CRF, did you encourage, or was there a program to encourage the managers that you were investing in to evaluate companies that have more diverse management team portfolio companies?
Oh, was there? Let's see. So the emerging manager portfolio is a $5 billion portfolio that's set aside. The fundamental purpose was to help minority and women-owned investment management firms, fund of funds, and other firms of across different assets and classes. And we did have a very small sleeve of venture there as well. First, to get them on board through the process to invest public money. So there's sort of a gauntlet that you have to get through to finally get to the place where, okay, I'm managing, New York State Common Retirement Fund capital, which is very, very different from family office money or foundation money. Most of the folks I know at family offices, no offense to any president, like, we don't care how much we make, because we've got money. We're going to be okay. We're not worried about paying the content bill. Just don't lose money. You can get a 3% return, you can get 12%, but don't hit that 0.1% negative, or you're out here. With public pension plan money, the moral hazard multiplies, because it's not, some wealthy family. We're talking about widows and orphans money. We're talking about grandma and grandpa teacher, and the woman who lost her husband in 9/11. We're talking about those people's money. So, your approach to it, your mindset to it, you're sitting there, you're a senior investment officer, you're looking through all of these proposals, and you're like, I don't want to get this wrong, but at the same time, I still have this mission to try to help as many of these folks get onto the platform as possible. Once they get onto the platform, then the goal is to try to help to get them, they're brought in small increments, and maybe $10 to $15 million of capital invest. Wait a couple of years, see how you do. Everything looks good, returns continue to be positive, then we get you onto the main platform. Then we're talking about the $100 million, $200 million application. So then you're on the core platform. But as a senior investment officer, if I look at an emerging manager, and then I look at a BlackRock fund, right? I won't call it BlackRock. Let's say, a larger institutions fund. And, maybe that fund has performed okay, maybe they haven't, maybe they're in the negative. Is my job going to be online if I guess with that institution versus guessing with that minority woman-owned fund? Somebody going to look at me and say, you invested in that, big name institution fund. They didn't do so well, but that's okay. But you invest in that emerging managers, let's go through their backgrounds again, and did you ask them like these questions, and what it's like, wait a second, you gave the mainstream fund 2 years of runway before we began to question whether or not this was a good idea. You gave this emerging manager, at month 6, we're having weekly meetings about these folks. By month 12, we're like, okay, maybe we should talk about clawing back the capital. And if you can imagine, we're talking about some of these institutions, a $200 billion portfolio. I'm not a Fields Medal winner, but calculating the risk of $10 million, $15 million investment against a $200 billion fund. They make that money up on tips. So, but there was this pressure. You didn't want to get it wrong with these folks. It's okay to get it wrong with these folks. You don't want to get it wrong with these folks. So that is to say, there are a number of institutions that have good folks who are trying to get a lot of MWB-owned funds from the emerging status into the public portfolio, but it's a high hurdle. It's a real challenge.
I'd like to cover solutions quickly, and I'd like to cover it one person at a time, starting with Courtney and going down towards Roy. And Roy, maybe you can finish with your story about your background and the power of networking and how you were able to use that to build your business. Well, why don't we start? I'll throw out a few ideas to consider, because I got these ideas from you and from Joyce. One, expanding networks at the investment professional level, the entrepreneurial level, LPs, angel investors. 2, maybe launching accelerators that are geared towards minority entrepreneurs to replace that lack of wealth in friends and family communities for people of color. 3, having venture funds form scout funds that are targeting, sort of dorm room funds that are targeting the training and apprenticeship of African American and Latino entrepreneurs. 4, somebody mentioned it earlier, and I'm not sure who, but it was going to where, maybe it was Alan, going to where there will be greater populations of African Americans who are engaging in entrepreneurial activity. Atlanta is, a burgeoning tech center. And the African American population in the South is generally larger than the North and the West Coast. More minority focused funds, such as Harlem Capital, which has recently launched. 5, 6, crowdfunding. Right? It's a way to bypass traditional venture community and go right to the people. Right? Is that a way where African American and Latino founders can reach a broader community of color to support their investing? And finally, recruiting. Should we have more targeted recruiting? Jockwell, I'm an LP and proud attorney for SGF Ventures. They invested in a company called Jockwell, which does minority recruiting. Some of you may have heard of them. They're fairly prominent and they're doing well. They've got some interesting ideas about how to increase in the entrepreneurial world C-level executives of color. So those are 7 ideas I throw out. Let's just try and move to 2 minutes. Let's go, starting with you, Courtney. What do you think?
Yeah, one idea, just listening to those, is, at least in the VC ranks, is employ more VC associates and analysts in positions, because they are actually the ones that do the work and look through all the deals. I mean, we do because we're a smaller fund, but I'm sure Lenard could talk about, the analysts and the associates, they're the ones that go into the communities that say, oh, I found this great idea, and they get all the analytical, they do all the analysis and then present it to the LP or the GP group to discuss. But I think that would be key. And a quick story, there's a gentleman who played football. He graduated from Stanford and in industrial engineering, and he went to Booth, graduated. He was got all the awards, and he just now got a job at a VC fund. He was looking for like 2 years to get an associate's job. So populating that, I think, level would help increase at least the inflow of businesses.
I think that's a great idea. I think a couple of things. It's incumbent upon those of us in the community to help make sure that we're making ourselves resources to help really push forward this change. But I do think feeding the pool of analysts, associates to junior levels, and maybe mandating some laws or stipulations that are recently made for women, for minorities of color, or I should say minorities, would also help because, you know, the numbers and the variance is too great. And so it's really tough because you're in the ground floor. You know, I remember as a young man, I had writing in over African American, but even the only black guy in the board, I don't want to be
Okay. Thank you. So the market solution to this is to wait. That's what we're going to do. That's the market solution because they say that in 2040, America will be so by my calculations, 20 years from now. So 20 years ago is different than now. Absolutely. What is it going to look like in 2040? I don't know. I think the solution is not to wait. And I have this saying I use, which is to become tired of talk. And every pundit wants to get on TV. Oh, this is wonderful. I'm not here to do that. We're having a conversation and talk about the issues rather than become tired of talking and doing something about it. So what's the solution? Mine's a bit more drastic. I think all those speed things are great. Put money in people's hands. I need one of these billion-dollar funds to give $50 million to someone. Call that person he, she, general partner. And specifically and deliberately deliver $5 million shots to 10 companies, or whatever that looks like. So whatever the numbers, but a shock value, getting back to that, needs to happen to disrupt these two lines that I discussed earlier. And what needs to happen, because the market does not stop for people to grow up inside of funds. The market does not stop for numbers of graduates to increase, nor does it stop for any other means of people getting to achieve capital and the networks that come alongside it. I just want to note, capital's got more paper, but what we're really talking about is not green paper into a fund, into your bank account. It's everything else that comes along with it. So that's a piece of my solution.
I think about segregation and I think about legislation has to somehow, when these much larger funds, they're taking public money, which is connected to our money, and yet it is not dispersed back in any percentage near what our population is. So that's one thing that I think it doesn't change unless something like that changes it. And the second thing is, I've seen this with our film festival that we started 20-something years ago. So out of that festival, because we created a showcase of works, I was an executive at Miramax and I went to Sundance and I asked the head of Sundance at the time, I said, why don't you have more work by people of color? And he said, if there was good work, we would show it. And I started Urban World because of that. I just want to name some of the names that have come out of that festival. Lee Daniels came out of Urban World. Tim Story, who directed Fantastic Four. Ava DuVernay was my publicist. And so those filmmakers would not, we put them in a platform that showcased the talent so overwhelmingly and in front of Black and Latino audiences. And when executives would come and they would see it in its own environment, they're like, maybe we can sell tickets with this. And that's what helped it happen. So I think the same thing has to happen with technology, where we saw it in the music industry when the recording of an album got to a basement level. You saw things like Prince happen and other things. And I think the technology is getting to a point that anyone can build something, but it's that capital to get up in the outer atmosphere to awareness. But I think, like what she's doing, we can launch businesses in our own community that can catch hold really fast and get the bigger funding.
Thanks, Stacy.
So I'm a millennial, and I'm going to go with pushing a boundary here. I think a social experiment is in order. I often wonder if a white guy pitched my company, how fast would I get to funding? And this has been a conversation in one of my accelerator programs where there were a lot of diverse founders, women in general, people of color. We all said, yeah, I think that would be a great social experiment, because then you'll uncover that, okay, we can't get rid of Americans' biases overnight, right? That's not gonna happen. But if we choose the person who has the biggest voice in America, which are white men right now, and they pitch anybody's company, right? We'll start to see, wait, he pitched the company and about 60% of the companies that were funded were actually people of color. I think that we need to start challenging our biases. It will be a shock factor and a reality will set in that says, hey, you know, there's something to this. Am I being serious? Partially yes, partially no, but it's a thought.
So, but just for the record, you're not suggesting that white people pitch black people's businesses?
Oh, I am. And like I said, I'm partly serious and partly not, but it's been a conversation about amongst some founders of color that I've spoken to, and we've been really serious about this because we also understand that these deep-seated biases are not going to change overnight. So what's something that we can do today to take action? Well, in entertainment culture, that could be a great television show.
It would be a great reality show.
So, just to provide some historic context on that, in the mid-1950s, two brilliant African-American real estate entrepreneurs purchased some of the most expensive real estate in Los Angeles. They purchased it through the use of a white partner that they spent an extensive amount of time training and educating so that this guy could walk into a segregated bank or segregated lending facility and represent them. And then ultimately, you know, people started to figure out that the company was run by two African Americans and they accused them of fraud and put them in jail. So that is reality. That did happen. You know, so it's an experiment that has, yeah, and also if you own Apple TV, you will see the story with a film by Anthony Mackie and Sam Jackson called The Banker, which is coming out in mid-March. I had the opportunity to screen. It's one of the most empowering stories I've ever seen as a person who works in business. So going back to the question, I want to kind of focus on the African-American community for a second. Someone once told me that the three enemies of success are isolation, dismissiveness, and shame. We as African Americans, we have to stop isolating ourselves. We have to stop isolating ourselves from other communities. We have to stop isolating ourselves from each other. The HBCU guys, we got to talk to the Ivy League guys, and vice versa. Women have to start talking to the men. We all need to start communicating with each other. Wall Street guys need to talk to the Silicon Valley guys. That leads to dismissiveness. Can't be dismissive of each other. I can't look at Courtney because he's a football player. What does he know? Or that guy from MIT, you know, he's going to look down at me. He's not going to take me seriously. We have to stop being dismissive and make assumptions about what we can do for each other. And then find the shame, you know, touching on what Stacy talked about and what I talked about earlier. You know, if you stumble, if you fail, and it's a millennial thing, you know, you're supposed to be able to make mistakes and be comfortable with that and move forward. And I'm glad to see that because, you know, we can't be afraid to fail, afraid to stumble. I get the context of it because I work in business in Harlem. There are 165,000 people in central Harlem, 65% of them are black. Harlem has a 22% poverty rate amongst that 165,000 people. I'll bet you can guess we're a disproportionate number of those folks who live in poverty. Are they only 65% or they're probably in that 65%? That's majority African Americans. So that context of fear and anxiety about failing, losing, I would guess that few of the folks that you meet who are African American probably come from a place where those statistics exist. So I think the solution is to fight against those three enemies and to continue to do so and to allow time to correct things.
Again, I'm so outmatched on this panel with a very different perspective. So the place that I would look for is very practical solutions. One needs to create economic incentives for the investment community to invest in diversity. So it's the simplest, fastest way, because if you turn to a Goldman Sachs and you say, for the companies that you invest in with a diversity component, you will pay less taxes on their profits. Money will come flowing. So that would be my one suggestion. The other may be have institutions create public-private partnerships, especially school endowments, who have access to young talent and seem to have done a very poor job of taking their enormous asset base and using it to get those superior returns.
Roy, I think Roy will finish up. I think we're running a little bit late, so we probably won't take questions after Roy talks, but please feel free to visit with our panelists. Hopefully you guys can stay for a few minutes afterwards and mingle with you. Go ahead.
Sure. Before I tell my story, I do have an idea right here for what I see as real practical, something that I myself am doing right now. So, as I said earlier, I'm from the South Bronx, and I'm in a very unique position where I am around venture capitalists, hedge funds, and I'm around a lot of people that actually have money that wants to invest. And what I've learned is that every time I introduce it to somebody, they didn't even know these people existed, right? And they would love to invest, but they don't even know they existed. Then the people in my community in the South Bronx, they don't know how to get to these people that don't know that they existed. So one of the things that I started, I created a little incubator space in Hunts Point, and I call it Connect the Dots, where what I do there is I get local entrepreneurs to come in there, and we create small little incubator spaces, and what I do is I leverage my relationships, because I don't have the funds to help fund everyone, and I'm a little scared, right? I'm part of the people that's trying to create generational wealth to bring my family up as well. But what I do have is relationships. And what I do right now in my little space called Connect Dots is do exactly that. I get small entrepreneurs from the South Bronx, and I bring them downtown. I bring them around other entrepreneurs that can help them that are interested in space. I create resource maps, and I do different and by sectors. And I say, okay, we know we have people in this sector. I'm going to set a meeting with you to meet this person, right? And I can tell you today that out of 100 people that I literally made introductions as of right now, 40 of them has gotten money and has helped grow their business in different areas. So that's something that we can do very direct, very us, right here in this room, is go to our communities. And if you don't have funds, you could at the very least help connect those dots, right? So that's my, for that part. And now to go into my story of why and how I got those relationships and why we've been in that position. I'll give you a bit of a story to start off a little sad, but it's going to get a lot better. And it'll have a happy ending, I promise. So it's funny that I'm here on 23rd Street. So in 1985, my mother, she fell victim to the crack epidemic up in the South Bronx, and we got evicted from our apartment. And we were moved down here to a welfare hotel right here on 23rd Street between 5th and Madison. There's several old welfare hotels, which they're not welfare hotels here anymore, but in the early 80s, this is where they would send us, right around this corner. And my mother got lost in the streets. When me and her moved down here, I wouldn't see my mother for months on end. She was lost, she was smoking crack. I was at the time 12 or 13 years old, running around these same streets, trying to find food, trying to figure out what I was gonna get my next meal. So I began stealing fruit carts. I would go up to 27th Street, right here in Lexington, where there was a donut shop, and I would wait right there till 12 o'clock at night when they would throw out the stale donuts, right? So that was my move. I knew they was gonna throw them out, and I was there to accept them. And at some point, that wasn't enough. So at the early age of 13 years old, I started selling drugs right on 25th Street in Park Avenue, where there was a women's shelter hotel right there, and every woman in every shelter and every welfare hotel was smoking crack. So my idea was, I'm gonna go stand in front of the shelter and I'm gonna provide a demand, right? You want some crack? I'm gonna sell it to you. And this is at 13 years old. first day out there selling drugs, at 13, I got arrested right there. So that was the beginning of a failed drug entrepreneurship. So that wasn't very successful. And so at 13 years old, my mother comes to the juvenile facility to get me out. I'm scared. I'm thinking she's gonna beat me up, my mother. But she was so out of it that she was just like, come on, let's go home. And then when we got to 28th Street on the 6th train, she just went one way and I went the other. I said, Mom, we was going home. She said, I got something to do. I'll see you later. I want to see my mother for another 6 months. So what did I do? I went right back out there, started selling drugs again, right? You fail once, get back up, try again, right? So I'm out there, and that was just the beginning of that life of crime that I began. That life of crime led me up to the age of 18 years old when at one point the federal government came knocking on my door for selling a huge quantity of drugs in my community. And when I got arrested, they sentenced me at the beginning with life imprisonment. Through appeals, through motions, and through experiments up and down, I wound up serving a total of 10 years in prison of my life in jail. While I was in jail, one day I was looking at the TV, so it was segregated in there. So all the black and Hispanics sits on this side of the table, right? And this is in the feds. And then all the white collar crimes are sitting on that side of the table. And there was 2 TVs on the white collar side. They was watching CNBC, and they was watching stuff. And then on the black and Hispanic side, we was watching Martin Lawrence and BET. That's what it was, right? And then one day I'm watching this video, and the video was literally of Cash Money millionaires. It had a song called Bling Bling. And the whole video was them showing how much money they got, showing all their sets of jewelry, throwing it in my face. And I'm looking at the video, and then I look at the table over there, and they was looking at what it seemed to me on how to make money. And on this table with the black Spanish, we was just singing along to the lyrics of how much money you got and we're proud of you. Got all that money. So I woke up, I said, look, I'm on the wrong side of the table, clearly. Right? I gotta change my life or something, I gotta do something. So I got up, I walked to the other side of the table, and I befriended this gentleman. He was sitting there, nice little white fellow. He was just sitting there and said, how you doing? How you doing? And me and him started talking, and he became my mentor. And through that mentor, I started asking, hey, what can I do? They had the stock tickets on the TV, and it literally looked like the Matrix, with the little lines on it. I'm thinking, we sitting there learning how to fight karate, right? So that's what you do. And I said, listen, what is that? And he said, no, that's the stock, man. This is how we know where the stock is rising and falling. So I said, can you teach me? He said, absolutely. So he went and started, and he was reading this magazine, The Barons. And then he had this pink magazine. I was like, dude, you're in jail, you got a pink magazine, that's not really what you should be doing in prison. And he was like, no, man, this is the Financial Times. I'm like, all right, I'll read the Barons, you read the Financial Times. So when I started reading the Barons, the first thing that I noticed was that I didn't know a lot of the words. These words, I didn't go to junior high school, middle high school. I didn't graduate any school for that matter. So I knew I had to pour reading and learning. So what I did was I told my sister, I said, listen, babe, do me a favor. I need you to send me a book on the 400 mostly used words in business by the Princeton Review book, right, that college students use for the ACTs. So she sent me that book, I started reading that. So then when I started studying that book, then I started to literally understand the Barron newspaper, like unwrapped, like a whole new world, right? Because I understood these words, And so now I'm reading this stuff and I'm getting educated, I'm learning. Then I started to like to learn. So I told my sister, listen, do me a favor, send me another book, send me any book on stock and bonds. So she sent me a book on stock and bonds. I said, what's another book that they read in corporate? He said, well, they read this book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Fortune 500 company made some of their new employees read it. I called my sister, I need 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right? So she sent me that book. I loved that book so much in there that I actually sat down and created a curriculum and then convinced the jail to allow me to use the library for a class. Because in the book, it said the best way to learn is to teach. So I said, I need to teach somebody everything that I just read tomorrow. I got a brand new class for you guys, right? So, and then the inmates, I made it cool for the guys that were from the neighborhood that normally it wasn't okay to learn, but because I was one of them and I was doing the teaching, all of a sudden it was cool to come to my classroom, right? And then I bring some special guests, you know, the gentleman who got convicted of stock fraud. The largest Ponzi scheme in the world. That's movie stars in jail, right? So, you know, we had special attendees and they were coming in there with their glass on stocks and bonds. So now we're there. So I'm doing this learning, I'm reading all this stuff, I get hyped up, I said, I'm gonna come home, I'm gonna get a job, and I'm gonna do phenomenal out there. I get released from jail, I go to do an interview, and what happens? I don't get a job. I go to another one, that's okay. Look, I read these books, they don't care, they're not even taking the meeting with me. So that's okay, you know what, I'm gonna lower my standards just for right now, I'm gonna try to get a job at a stock room, right, in Macy's. I go there, they start asking me crazy questions, you know, like what's your strongest weakness? It doesn't try. You want to know my weakness? Like, you know, setting myself up with this question, right? So I said, look, just say you don't want to hire me, man. It's cool, I get it. So I walked out, and a friend of mine told me about this place called Strive. I go to this place called Strive. It's a work development community in Spanish Harlem, out of Taino Towers. And what they do there is that they take individuals like myself, not people that just came home from jail, just anybody from the community that needs an opportunity that they can graduate school. And I went there, and the first day I went there, they accepted me. They had an orientation class that day. Just coincidence, I went there, they had an orientation class. I sat there, and right there, when the founder was talking, I really felt like he was talking to me. I felt like he was talking my language. I said, I knew I wanted to do good, but I didn't have the blueprint. And that place, Strive, I knew was going to give me the blueprint. So I went through Strive, I went through the whole program, and Strive helped me get a job. My first job was over at Edie's Grand Ice Cream. I started working at Edie's Grand Ice Cream, cleaning ice cream freezers. From the very beginning, just right there outside, January, because all you guys love ice cream, I have to have a clean freezer for all you guys. That's your locals, joint greets. That's just what it was, right? So I'm cleaning these freezers, and I thought about this, you know what, I gotta kind of grow, I gotta find my way through this company. And the boss came to me and said, Roy, we really like you. We want you to get your CDL license because we want to put you on the truck. And I said to myself, okay, I'll work on that. But in my mind, I said, if I become a truck driver, I'm going to stay a truck driver because I'm going to be the best damn truck driver they ever seen, and nobody takes their best off out the race, right? So I said, I need to work in management. How do I do that? And what I saw was that every employee that was there was comfortable. Everybody there felt that they didn't have to work all the time. They felt they would be involved in their boss asked them to do something. So my job was to sit in the cafeteria room, hear all the complaints, and then go back to the boss and say, you need some help. You need to do that? And it was like, Roy, you're gonna do that? I said, absolutely. And my theory behind it was, I need to be seen in a managerial position. I need to do everything that they need me to do so that they can see that I'm more than just a truck driver, like every other Spanish person and black person that was there. That's the only way they envision them. I have to show them different, but I have to be different. And my different was, I'm gonna do everything that nobody else wants to do. And through that, I started building relationships. The bosses started taking a liking to me. They started having me do things. This one boss got so used to me, and I got him so comfortable that every time his boss would ask him something, he'll say, wait a minute, and he called Roy, and the CEO will say, what do I need you for? Matter of fact, call Roy. And I came in the room, and he said, Roy, listen, clearly every time I ask this guy a question, he says he got to call you, so I might as well put you in position. What are you doing now? I said, work for him. I don't even have a position. I'm some sort of fake manager right now. He said, well, you're a new manager, you're a territory manager, and this is who you are. So I said, great. So I started moving up. I started saving my money, a little bit of money. And there was an opportunity on the board. I saw there was a route for sale. So I saw that little route that there was for sale, wasn't for sale for a lot of money. And I said, I want this opportunity. I went to the CEO. I said, listen, I see you guys are selling the route. Yeah, Roy, it's a small route. I said, listen, I can turn this route into 5 routes. you know, what are you talking about? Now, he doesn't know that I was once failed journalist. But in a short time space, I sold a lot. Right? So distribution was something that I knew. It was just the other kind of white stuff, right? So, but I knew how to sell. And he was so daring, he was looking at me and said, "Roy, you know what, Roy? That's been on that board for like a year, nobody cared. And just because you asked, I'm gonna give you that truck, you're gonna get that route." So I turned that route literally in under a year into 5 routes. I started selling, that was my first 5 routes. When I got those first 5 routes, I went back to Strive and started hiring people from Strive to come work on the ice cream trucks. I made those 5 trucks so successful that the CEO came to me, he couldn't believe what I did. He said, "Roy, I wanna buy those 5 trucks from you now. So I'm gonna buy them from you, I'm gonna give you a nice payday, and I want you to come back into the company and be a general manager. And I want you to run a $40 million portion of my business." So I said, "Listen, great. I'm in," right? I got that big check, put it in the bank, and then now I'm sitting there and now I'm general manager, but it wasn't fulfilling because inside, as you guys already know, I have an entrepreneurial spirit, right? So a couple of years I'm working there, I decided, you know what, I gotta move on some of this, I gotta do something else. So I went out and I negotiated with the largest ice cream distributor at the time, and I said, "Listen, came up with some ideas, came up with some money, and I came up with plans to buy those routes, but I didn't have the money." And like we were talking about earlier, crowdfunding, my family, they don't have bail money. We over here talking about you don't have money to lend for entrepreneur. We can't get Khalid Bravo, couldn't get $500, his mother could get $500 to get him out of jail. I am Khalid Bravo from the Bronx, right? My mother didn't have bail money. That's what I just told y'all, my mother's story, right? But I figured it out. I went there and I started leveraging relationships within the company, the CEO, and I sold him on this phenomenal plan on how the best thing for you is to let me leave your company, lend $10 million, right? So let me go buy this business and I'm going to transform the whole ice cream industry. So he went with it, right? But he's also crafty. He figured out how to make the numbers work. And I went and bought that company. That company from $1 million turned into $3 million. And the moment it turned into $3 million, the first thing that happened to me, instead of being excited, I got scared. I was scared because I was scared to lose this business. So I'm sitting there thinking, what am I going to do? Now, 6 years prior to that, when I first went back to Strive to hire people, through giving a small speech at Strive, when I came off the stage, this lady came up to me and introduced herself to me, and her name was Dina Powell. And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Dina Powell, right? Goldman Sachs, you know? So she's on my tables right now trying to fix the world economy, right? So she said, "Well, my name is Roy Castro, and I'm with Goldman Sachs, and I love your story. And here's my business card." And I took that business card, and I said, "This is the most important business card in the planet." I didn't know what to do with this card, so I just put it in my pocket, and I left it in my wallet. It stood there for 6 years because I didn't know what to do with it. Now, fast forward, when I had a $3 million business, I'm looking at my wife, I said, "I need a mentorship." Somebody was speaking up here about needing a mentor. I needed a mentorship, and I didn't know where to go. Who's gonna help me? How can I scale this business? So my wife said, "Listen, you got that business card in your pocket. Either use it or lose it, bro. Like, figure it out. Either throw it out or email her." I sent her an email. Thanksgiving Eve, and she replied to me right away. "Yeah, Roy, I remember you. I remember being thoroughly impressed by you." I said, "Oh my God, this is phenomenal." She says, "As a matter of fact, I could help you. There's a program that Goldman Sachs is doing called the 10,000 Small Business Initiative. It already started, but I'm gonna get you in." She got me into the Goldman Sachs. So now I'm sitting there doing the 10,000 Small Business Initiative. She got me in, now I got all this pressure on me. I was probably the only Spanish person in there. Everybody in there looked very successful, and I came to be on the word of the power. So now I'm scared. What am I going to do? The only thing that I can do is outperform everybody. And by everybody, I literally outperformed everybody to the point where they asked me, I graduated that class valedictorian. They asked me to give the keynote speaker. Somehow, through the grapevines, Warren Buffett heard something about it, and Warren Buffett said, I'm going to come to the graduation and I'm gonna give this kid this diploma. So on the stage, I had Warren Buffett, Jack Dorsey, Lloyd Blankfein, and Mayor Bloomberg. So I'm sitting there on stage, I'm with Warren, and I'm looking, what's up, Warren? The guy sitting right there, Warren Buffett, Warren, right? So Warren Buffett is sitting there, and now I'm in this position that now the world is seeing me in front of all these millionaires, all these things that's going on, and now with everything that I learned at the Goldman Sachs Small Business Initiative, what happened was I learned actually how to grow my business. I learned things I didn't know. You got to pay out taxes, right? On every dollar. Every dollar. Guys, small businesses, every dollar. Which is something I got to teach my community now, that I do now, is to show people how you need to pay your taxes if you one day want to sell this business, right? If you want to add real value and you want to meet my new friends and you want to sell your business to them, they need to see that this company is profitable, right? What I did there was, so through meeting them, I wound up growing my business. I wound up buying our multiple ice creams, and I wound up becoming New York's largest Haagen-Dazs distributor, like throughout the whole New York right now. So that's my position and where I'm at right now. And through that relationship and through that networking and me connecting the dots, me having other meetings with Lloyd Blankfein, because now I call Lloyd Blankfein, so I got an idea, he's taking the call, he's taking the meeting, right? Dina Powell, Goldman, Jeffries Capital, they all taking the meeting with me right now. And to show the power of the network, to bring this conversation to an end, a very dear friend of mine, who we became really good friends, his name is Henry, and he has a juice called Remedy Organic, another serial entrepreneur. He and I met, we became lifelong friends. And a few weeks ago, we're talking, and he says, well, you're doing a lot of big things, you need some really good people behind you, and I got somebody that I want you to call. I'm gonna set up this call, and he put this phone call and introduced me to the one and only Ed. He and I just met, we sit down, we talk about the power of network, and 2 weeks later, I'm here talking to you guys, ready to grow my network even larger. So thank you guys for your time.